Deltarune chapters 3 and 4 have been out for almost 2 weeks, and this is already plenty of time to analyze the game and theorize about what the rest of the game may or may not look like. And this is what the community did, as plenty of content creators have already expressed their ideas and beliefs. And now it's my turn. I think I'm finally able to write down all my ideas about what is going on in the story, my own vision. Of course, it would take a lot of time to talk about absolutely everything that happens in those last 2 chapters, so I'm only going to talk about a specific subject, the Roaring Knight and their supposed allies. This theory covers multiple things I believed and kind of complete each other, but I named it after the final conclusion, my shelter town. One last thing before we start, this is my first time making a video like this, and I really dislike editing as much as I'm bad at it, so I decided this is going to be a PowerPoint presentation about my theory, so just assume that I am presenting this as an oral exam subject in front of my class, and you are the other students. Which also means, summary! First, we're going to take a look at some interesting elements of the story, it shows in regards to my theory. Some of them are more obvious than the others, but I still want to spend as much time as possible on each one of them. See, the Deltarune community has this annoying habit of making assumptions and using those assumptions to back up arguments, or even more assumptions. I will also have to make assumptions in this video, of course, but I really want to explain my arguments as much as possible so as to make sure we are all on the same page. Then, we will take those elements and group them together to draw conclusions and start writing a narrative. Then, we will take all of it and draw one final conclusion, this being the last part of my theory, my shelter town. Anyway, let's get started. Elements! So, first of all, never do this in your class presentation, this is a terrible idea. But for the sake of this video, let's ignore it, okay? So, all those elements are grouped in 3 categories by the 3 colors, red, blue, and green. There is a 4th category, but we get on that later. Okay, so now we can start analyzing and assembling those elements. So first, here is my first subpart, which is a strange conspiracy in Hometown. We will be using the arguments Carol, Asgo, and Alvin are extremely suspicious. The 3 symbols on the shuttle's door each represent the holidays, the police, and the church. The 3 symbols on the shuttle door each represent someone who has disappeared or is supposed to disappear, death and then in Toyo. And finally, Chris also seems to be working with Carol. So, the 3 symbols on the shelter door each represent the holidays, the police, and the church. Alvin, who is the biggest representative of the church, has shown extremely suspicious as he seems to be aware of whatever dark event occurred in or around the shelter. During chapter 2, if you visit the graveyard with Susie and talk with Alvin and leave, you can hear him talking to himself as he seems conflicted about something regarding a hammer. It is later revealed in chapter 4 that Gerson was revived when a dark fountain was created in the church because it contains Gerson's dust and a hammer, which were supposed to be buried, as well as a photograph of him. Ralsei, after destroying the statue of Gerson in Susie's Dark World, hints at us that Gerson was allowed to be revived earlier because the previous Dark Fountain was created by someone who viewed Gerson as a loved one. Asgore, in his hidden dialogue in chapter 4, describes possessing a black shard, which is linked to either a shadow crystal or a piece of the knight's weapon. And he's talking to himself about how he's going to do something big that will bring the family together again, and that Toria we have no choice but to see it. Chapter 4 also shows us the prophecy with the use of these blue-tinted glass murals, one of which shows an image of Asgore with a crown, described as the Flower Man trapped in asylum. Gerson, during his secret boss fight, also tells us how his work of fiction, Lord of the Hammer, is a retelling of the prophecy, and describes each chapter of his work in a way that corresponds to each current chapter of the game. Then chapter 5. When he talks about chapter 5, he says, Chapter 5, the field of pink and gold. The vast garden is charred in an inferno of jealousy. All these elements hint at the Chapter 5 Dark World adventure to take place in Asgore's shop, Flower King, and that Asgore himself will play a big role in it, and that whatever it is was premeditated. Carol, while she doesn't have as many links to the creation of Dark Fountains as Alvin and Asgore, is also suspicious in the sense that she is secretly working with Chris to achieve something, and that they have a promise. She is also working with Asgore, and though it is not directly stated that their relationship is anything more than business, Asgore seems to be hiding something about it. The symbol of the pine tree also links the Holiday family to this whole mystery, and I believe Carol is the most likely of the 4 members of this family to be part of this conspiracy. Her secret plan with Chris also ties her to the Knight, since Chris is very likely working with the Knight as well, as we will see later. There is also a secondary trio of people who could also represent the 3 symbols. Undine, who was kidnapped by the Knight and locked into shelter as a representative of the police. Toriel, who the Knight initially wanted to take away as a representative of the church. Lastly, is a secondary member of the Holiday family, which could be Noah, Rudy, or Death. I did not currently have any idea what is the purpose of this secondary trio of people in the great scheme of things, but they are definitely involved in the conspiracy, although they might not necessarily know about it. Second subplot. Who is the Knight? What is the Knight? How does the Knight? We'll be covering the elements. We have reasons to believe Death is the Knight more than Carol, Woody, or Noah. Chris seems to be working with the Knight in some way. Chris can apparently open the shutter. The Knight is closer to a mindless beast than a normal, sane Lightman. The Knight has managed to not make themselves seen. And finally, there is a dark world in the shelter which the Knight enters with Undine at the end of chapter 3. First of all, let's look at what we have. The Knight's weapon more often is shaped like a sort of saber, and they usually attack by spawning swords. But the first time we meet the Knight, before their weapon becomes a blade, it first takes the shape of a baseball bat. This object is pretty heavily associated with Death, as no other character has anything to do with baseball bats, and from the contents of this room, we can confidently assume she was very into sports. Plus, nowhere does tell us about Death hitting Chris with a baseball bat. The Knight can open the shelter and enter the dark world inside it. They take Undine in the shelter at the end of chapter 3, so it seems the shelter is at the center of whatever plan they have in mind. The Knight seems to be working together with Chris, or at least they recognize and know each other enough not to want to hurt each other. Chris does very little damage to the Knight in combat, and refuses to attack them if you manage to make your way to the top of the stairs at the beginning of chapter 4's Dark World adventure. On the Knight's side, when they take down the fun gang one after the other, if you manage to end the fight by lowering their health, they don't actually attack Chris, but make them bow down. Another sign of Chris and the Knight collaborating happens if you manage to utterly humiliate the Knight by perfectly dodging the attacks. The narration describes how Chris coughs and how the Knight responds with a head nod. This happens before the Knight forcefully ends the fight by blitzing Susan Rarsay. Lastly, Chris is apparently able to open the shutter just like the Knight, which is extremely suspicious. This may actually be the Knight rather than Chris, but honestly this doesn't change anything. Somehow, the Knight has managed to keep their identity secret this entire time. This is even more strange if we look at it from the lens of Death being the Knight, because if she were to suddenly appear in Hometown, it absolutely wouldn't go unnoticed. Especially concerning the Chapter 2 Dark Fountain, which was made in the library at a time where it was surrounded by people and even Undine. This means whoever created the Dark Fountains either managed to, somehow, not make themselves seen despite the number of potential witnesses, or isn't suspicious to the people of Hometown. The Knight's behavior and appearance are extremely unusual. Normally when a Lightner enters the Dark World, Their outfit and color scheme may change, but their overall appearance and body shape is the same, and their minds and personalities aren't altered at all. The knight is a completely different thing. They look skeletal, their mouth can distort into an eye or a visor, and they can open their weirdly shaped ribcage to show a huge eye at the center of their body. The shape of their head can also completely change to become a much more wide, animalistic head and let out a primal scream. Those wide screams and lack of speech also imply that something is wrong with their mind, and although they are just sane enough to collaborate with Chris and understand and react to words, it is clear that something is up. This probably means their light world appearance was also changed by whatever did this to them. It needs to be noted after all that they managed to completely overpower Undyne, who is strong enough to easily lift a car. In any case, the knight is clearly not just some lightner. Something must have corrupted them and messed up their mind, which means they probably can't really go out in the light world without being noticed or making a mess. From all this information, we can make a conclusion about what's up with the knight. The knight is likely Death, who has been corrupted and had her mind messed up by something, probably in regards to Darkhold shenanigans. She is secretly working with Chris, who is also working with Carol. Despite her sinister appearance, animalistic behavior, and her recent activities in crowded places, she has managed to stay unnoticed by the inhabitants of Hometown. Lastly, she can enter the shelter in which there is a dark world, and in which she trapped Undyne and also wants to trap Toriel. Final subpart, the Knight as part of the conspiracy. Now that both the Hampton conspiracy and the Knight have been established, it is time to link these two things together. Indeed, I believe that the Knight is tied to whatever Carol, Asgore, and Alvin are doing. First of all, Gerson's presence in the Chapter 4 report is proof of Alvin and the Knight collaborating. Alvin's decision to unearth his father's dust and hammer was a thoughtful one, as seen in the graveyard in Chapter 2. Those things being in Alvin's office alongside the photograph of Gerson and a dark fountain conveniently being opened in the church tells me that Alvin had something to do with the creation of this dark fountain. His reasons for doing this are pretty clear. He wants to revive his father. Alvin feels he doesn't have what it takes to live up to his father's legacy, as he wasn't able to write like he did. His insecurities would have pushed him to want to revive his father, so that his legacy wouldn't die without a heir to pass the torch to. Then comes the turning point. As Ralsei said, darkness patterned after the memory of a loved one tend to only appear in very specific darknesses. A loved one, huh? Alvin unearthing his father's dust and hammer, the dark fountain being created in the church, a dark nerve patterned after the memory of a loved one. Yep, I believe Alvin is the one who created the Chapter 4 Dark Fountain. Now, let's look at Asgore. The fact he possesses a strange black shard, may this be a shadow crystal or a piece of the Knight's sword, ties him to the Knight. And this big thing he wants to do to make Toriel finally believe him and to make things go back to how they used to be. Potential Darkhold in the Flower King shop, Asgore being shown in the prophecy wearing a crown, the Toriel in the Chapter 3 Dark World, the Inferno mentioned by Gerson in Chapter 5 of Lord of the Hammer, tying back to Asgore's fire powers in Undertale. Yeah, I also believe Asgore is going to make a dark fountain in Chapter 5. But then, what about Carol? I mean, surely no one will question the mayor entering the library at some random time in the morning, or the school, or the church. And when you look at it, those three places are conveniently close to the town hall. Toriel's house is pretty far from the town hall, but the Knight didn't open Chapter 3's Dark Fountain, Chris did. So then, who is the Knight? How come there are multiple people opening Dark Fountains, but the Knight's appearance stays the same and looks nothing like either Alvin or Asgore? How come the knight's behavior is so animalistic, but all three members of the Hampton conspiracy still kept their sanity? Well, it's here that you can take two different paths. Either you conclude that Carol is the knight and that Alvin and Asgore help her create dark fountains. This is a possibility. I can't deny that. But then you'd have to explain the baseball bat. And while Carol definitely isn't in her right mind, she didn't go full beast mode like the knight. Also, come on, no white woman in her 40s aura farms like that. I mean, come on. Arms crossed, back turned to the heroes now. Or then, you can conclude that Death is the knight, and that Carol, Alvin, and Asgore opened dark fountains for her. They didn't know about the knight at all, or not. Their reason for all working together isn't clear. Maybe Carol, Alvin, Asgore, and Chris want to bring back Death to how she used to be. Carol and Asgore would definitely want that. Maybe they think they need to work with Death and figure out how Dark Worlds work to do that. But then, how does the knight even get inside the Dark Worlds without being seen? Alright, this is my crackpot theory. See, among the list of interesting story elements I mentioned at the beginning, there is one I didn't delve into, being that Warsay never mentions the Shelter Dark World. I mean, it's weird, right? It's right there, it exists, and has existed for who knows how long. But Warsay just never ever talks about it. I'm not actually going to talk about this. The truth is, I don't know. I first wrote an entire paragraph on how the Shattered Dark World might be different from other Dark Worlds, like Castletown. That would explain why Warsay doesn't detect it as a dark presence, but too much of it was based on assumptions on top of assumptions, so I don't keep it. We're just gonna have to assume Warsay doesn't mention the Shattered Dark World because he doesn't want to, or he can't for some unknown reason. But there is something else about Warsay that is pretty interesting. So let's focus on the knight and a little bit on Warsay. See, I'm especially interested in how Warsay can travel from Castletown to any other Dark World, just like that. We've known since Chapter 1 that two Dark Worlds can be connected in the same world. Castletown and the Count Kingdom Dark World both existed on the same plane of existence, and we were able to travel from one to the other. Because of that, I don't think it's that strange for Warsay to be able to suddenly appear in the Cyber World, TV World, or in the Dark Sanctuaries. If all Dark Worlds exist in the same plane of existence, then it's just a matter of getting there. So where am I getting with this? Well, it's easy. What Dark World has existed for quite some time, meaning the people in it live in real time, as opposite to one that has just been created, which allows for anyone in that Dark World to simply access any new Dark World right after it's created. Castletown, right? No, I'm talking about the Shattered Dark World. My crackpot theory is that the knight can use the Shelter Dark World exactly like Warsay does with Castletown. They can just chill out in the shelter, and when a new Dark Fountain is created, because the Shelter Dark World is constantly active, just like Castletown, the knight can just directly travel from the shelter to this new Dark World, just like Warsay does. This is why they have gone unnoticed this whole time, because they don't even have to get out of the Dark World. This is where the knight mocks Susie at the end of chapter 4, when she threatens them to jump them in the light world with Chris, because the mere idea of confronting the knight in the light world at all is stupid. The only moment the knight gets out of the dark world is during the night, at the end of chapter 3, when no one can notice them. And what do you know, they are strong enough to completely overpower Undyne. Some white woman in her 40s wouldn't do that. We can push it even further. Maybe the reason the knight is the way they are, all distorted, corrupted and wild, is because of the time they spent in the dark world without getting out. And maybe this is what they're trying to make Undyne and Toria go through. Alright, I'm starting to lose it there. Truth is, we've made a dead end. As I started analyzing the story, the different paths that it could take, I realized that no matter which theory you believe in, no matter which route you take, even if all routes are just as believable as the others, there is always something missing. A bit of context, a contradiction. I love this and at the same time I hate it. It's just so frustrating. It's like you're almost there. I mean, sure, the Hometown conspiracy to increase open dark fountains for the night, but then who tries to kidnap Undyne Toriel? But why? Does it have something to do with the three symbols? Undyne for the police, Toriel for the church, and just for the holidays, who's already been corrupted in his way to complete the process? But then what's up with the three codes and Carol, Alvin, and Asgore? I'd imagine the three symbols are there because Carol, Alvin, and Asgore are the only three ones who know what happened in the shelter. But then if Death being trapped in the shelter and becoming the night came before the idea that a member of the holiday, a member of the church, and a representative of the church must all be trapped in the dark world, then who decided that? Why was Death even locked in the shelter then? And if Death was locked in the shelter at all, this means the code to lock the shelter doors was already there, and three people already had to know the code. Who created the shelter dark world? Death? To escape? And that's why she's the Roaring Knight? Because she had no way to escape the dark world once it was created? Because the shelter had been locked? Wait, that actually makes sense. But then, why the three symbols? Carol definitely wouldn't want that. Huh. Alright, you get it. Trying to make sense of all of this is hard. And to think I said chapters 3 and 4 would answer all our questions. I mean, they did answer questions, but now we also have more questions and mysteries to solve. I think this is the furthest I can go with my theories while still writing an interesting narrative, so now I can just hold on to that theory until chapter 5 drops. Because, remember, always play the game with the mindset of all our theories around. And so, that's it. First time making a video like this, so don't be too harsh if you think this video is just nonsensical yapping. And feel free to share it if you find it interesting, or comment about it if you have something to add or ask about it, or if you disagree. Anyway, thank you for watching and have a nice day.